So here's a comment that is hot off the press, as they used to say. I just saw this today, this being Sunday afternoon, and I'll be planning to post this on Tuesday. So fresh comment, sort of a criticism, but he says it politely, so I can handle that. Here's what he says. He says, "Sorry, although I like your channel, I'll take what Dr. Westman says about counting total carbs rather than net carbs." So this was apparently in response to a video where I mentioned that I do pay attention to net carbs. And I know there are a lot of the keto folks that say, forget the net carbs, just go by the total carbs. And so a lot of people take that advice, and so I thought I would give a response and make several points about this. The first question you have to answer is, why would you even look at carbs in the first place? Why would you wonder how many carbs does this have, whether you're talking total carbs or net carbs? Why would you bother to turn that package over, look at the nutritional information, and go down to the carbs? Again, whether net carbs or total carb, why would you do that? What would be the point of it? Well, if you're diabetic, there's a very good point. And the point is, you do it to assess the likelihood, and let me highlight that word likelihood, the likelihood that that food may spike your blood sugar too much. And so if I look at a moon pie, for example, which is a pastry, sugary, nasty snack, and it's got like 60 grams of carbs, I don't have to go home and test myself and see whether this is going to work. When I look at those 60 grams of carbs, almost all of them sugar, along with some white flour, is like, no thanks. But on the other hand, there are a lot of foods and meals that you just do not know how they're going to affect you until you eat them and then test yourself afterwards. So my feeling is there's no magic number of carbs that is going to work for everybody. It's not like Moses came down from Mount Sinai and he had a second tablet that told that we should never eat more than 20 grams of carbs or net carbs with any given meal or per day. So it's not magical. It's not something that works for everybody. But in answer to that question, when I look at a package, I want to know what's the likelihood of it spiking my blood sugar a lot. But that number by itself doesn't always tell me. And I have to resort to a fella that I met a long time ago named Mike the glucose meter. He's the expert, not the number written on the package, whether you're talking net carbs or carbs. So, for example, if I look at a particular food and it says 22 grams of carbs, but 18 of those are fiber, or maybe 15 are fiber and some are sugar alcohols, but so the net carbs works itself down to like 3 or 4, I say to myself, that could work for me, but I will never know for sure until I eat it and test myself about an hour and 20 minutes afterward. For me, for some people, they need to test themselves sooner, for others later. So that number on the package is not the expert. It's not the ultimate authority. Mike the meter, the glucose meter, is going to tell you what is exactly right for you. So when someone says, well, I don't go by net carbs, I just go by carbs, that really isn't very meaningful. In my perspective, because I'm not interested in really carbs versus net carbs. I'm mostly interested in how much will this spike me. But I have learned by a process of a lot of testing and trying out different foods and testing myself, I've learned that I can get a pretty good idea of how far I'm going to spike by looking at the net carbs oftentimes. So, The question then becomes, will this spike me? And I'll never know until Mike comes along. This is at the heart of my low spike diet. Now, Dr. Westman, and let me say, I appreciate him, I respect him, I like him. He seems like a great guy. So no put down on him. But he is more of an obesity doctor than he is a diabetes doctor. So when people come in that are extremely obese and they've got all kinds of medical health issues as a result, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, I don't think so because I've read one or two of his books, he will put them or suggest that they go on a very low carb, and he goes by total carbs diet. And so when you eat a meal, you count your carbs, and over the day, it might be 20 or 30 grams of carbs per day. And so he issues an edict, if they're willing to accept it, you shouldn't eat more than this many carbs, and he does go by total carbs. But you'll notice if you've listened to my videos very long, I never tell people what your total carbs should be. Sometimes I will mock the associations and organizations that recommend 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal, plus snacks of 15 or 20 grams of carbs per snack. That's going to get you up close to 200 grams of carbs per day. Yeah, that's way too many total or net carbs. But I don't tell people. Some people want to know. They will ask me, Dennis, how many carbs should I eat per day? And I just don't tell them. What I do say is use your glucose meter to find out what works for you. Now, in my case, I've gotten my numbers down low enough and my baseline is low enough that I can set an upper limit of about 125. And I don't even like the 120s mostly, but sometimes I'll let myself eat something that'll go up to around 125. I know I've told you in the past 140 is my total limit. That's like on special occasions, maybe a holiday or something. But normally, 125 is about as high as I want it to go. So it wouldn't matter if someone says, well, Dennis, that's got 10 net carbs, but it's got 30 total carbs. It's like, well, this may work for me. Let me eat it. Let me try it. And if I test myself and it works and I get a 118 for a peak, and again, my peak is usually around an hour and 20 minutes, then I'm good, no matter what the carbs are. If, on the other hand, it says it's only got 3 net grams of carbs, but I eat it and then an hour and 20 minutes later, I jump up to 155, it's like, no, that doesn't work at all for me. And not all that glitters is gold, and not all foods that have keto proudly stamped on their package are necessarily going to be good for your blood sugar, but you won't know until you try it and test yourself. Now, some things I don't even need to test. I don't need to test a baked potato. I don't need to test a big mound of rice. And there's a lot of things I don't need to test, but there are some things that are kind of iffy and some things I can get away with. And so I find that I can get away with a bowl of beans as long as there's other things in it and it's not just pure beans and it's a smaller bowl. And my spike isn't that much. I'm not looking for zero spike. I'm not looking for no spike at all or no raise at all in my blood sugar. That wouldn't be normal or natural or right or healthy. I'm just looking for a nice, gentle, easy rise, the way it used to be all the time when I was 22 years old, but it's not that way anymore. So I eat foods that'll get me that nice, gentle, easy rise, and the ones that don't, I won't eat. It's that simple. Now, if you never used a glucose meter, then the number of carbs would be a pretty big deal because that's about all you would have to go by. So you'd look at the package carefully. Okay, this is 22 grams of carbs. Can't do it. And well, this says 30 grams of carbs, but by the time you cut down all these fiber carbs and sugar alcohols, we're down to 8 grams. And you'd have to make a decision based on your knowledge. And a lot of the keto experts say don't even count net carbs. I say count Mike the meter and find out what he says. And so the ultimate question is, how high are you spiking? Now, let me say this. If you're just getting started in this process and your numbers are way high, let's say you wake up in the morning with a 195 and throughout much of the day you're at 250, then there's no way you can say, well, I'm going to set my goal to be at 125 an hour after a meal or an hour and a half after a meal. You can't do that because you're already at 200 and some before you even eat the meal. But here's what you can say. I'm going to eat a meal, and I don't want that meal to raise me very high. Maybe I'm at 225 right now, and I can't do much about that for now, although I know I'll get it down later as time goes by. But I don't want to jump from 225 to 400 or 225 to 325. So I'm going to look for foods and meals that don't bump me up very much, whatever your current glucose is. And if you will do that consistently, what is likely to happen is those numbers will come down, 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 until eventually you're starting your meals at 120 or 110 or 100 or 95. And then you can set those goals like 125, 130, 135, whatever you do. And basically, my encouragement is you are responsible for your own health. I'm not. Your mama's not. Dr. Westman is not. Ultimately, it comes down to you. And you can get good advice, read the books, listen to the experts, but you're going to have to make the decision. How far do I want to allow my blood sugar to rise? How many grams of carbs should I eat per meal? Or what kind of a spike should I see? And I'm always recommending a low spike diet. Repeat, a low spike diet. Not necessarily 20 grams of carbs per meal or 10 grams or 20 grams of carbs per day, a low spike diet. That means, number one, you don't eat a lot of meals, maybe 2 meals per day, or 3 if you're skinny. And you test yourself afterwards and you make sure you're eating meals that just don't raise your blood sugar much. And you're in good shape, whether you go by net carbs or total carbs. One of the things that I find kind of ironic is that a lot of the keto experts love avocados. They recommend them like crazy. Avocados, avocados, avocados. Go to the store and load your basket with avocados. And yet these same people, some of them, will say, don't go by net carbs, go by total carbs. But if you went by total carbs, you'd never eat another avocado in your life unless it was a little scrawny thing, because avocados actually have quite a few carbs, but they're almost all fiber carbs. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say hypocritical, but it's a little bit odd that you have some people that will just rave about avocados, and yet they'll say strictly, well, I don't believe in the net carbs thing. If you don't, you ought not to eat avocados for sure. So what we're talking about, folks, is a baseline level. If you can get your baseline level down close to 100, ideally below 100, but at least close to 100, then you can start measuring those spikes and setting a target for yourself. And as I said, you have to make that decision. How high will I allow it to go? I've made mine, and I've told you freely what my targets are, what my limits are, but that's not necessarily you. And I know what foods I can get away with and what I can. And when I try something new, I bring out Mike the meter and test and see how that works. When I first started watching my blood sugar and knowing I had to get it low and defeat this monster, I didn't initially start out by looking much at carb numbers at all. High carb, low carb, net carbs, total carbs. I just used my meter. And I'd eat a food and it would go too high, and it's like, nope, I can't eat that. And I'd eat another meal and it didn't go very high, didn't bump it up my glucose much. I go, yeah, that works for me. But after a while of doing that, I began to realize I could pretty well predict how foods would react, how my body would react to various foods and meals. And so I began to use the carbs. And for me, the net carbs is kind of what I go by. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. One way or the other, we're all moving the same direction, which is to get our glucose levels in the realm of normality. Basically close to normal. If you're 60 years old, you're never going to be like you were when you were 22. So normal for a 60-year-old isn't quite normal for a 22-year-old, but your blood sugar can be almost as good as it was when you were 22. And that's what we want. Good, stable, relatively normal glucose. Your body will thank you. Those complications are going to begin to recede, and you're on your way, God willing, to a healthy, strong, long life. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.